900 years, heresy sown. Truth was twisted, its seeds were grown. Break the lies, spark the mission. Welcome to Quranic Inquisition.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Peace of the Lord to all of you. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, namaste. Welcome to the show. We're going to talk about a topic that is important because of something that is happening next week. Next week, as many of people already have heard, there is going to be a great debate between the one and only Jay Smith and the one and only Raymond Ibrahim, and there is going to be that confrontation between the origins of Islam when it comes to Muhammad, whether he existed or not. So we thought we would actually have one little show to start building the bridge towards that conversation that is going to happen next week. And Kash and I will also do a review, which we're really looking forward to that one. So make sure that you tune in, because we are going to go through everything that they say, or at least the very important things, and add our own commentary. So that should be very exciting, but that's next week. For now, we are here to talk about Umar, and with us, as always, Kash. Hello, Kash. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, JC. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Are you ready to talk a little bit about Umar?
I'm really excited about this because in this, a lot of the material I haven't actually seen before. This is something that you are way more of an expert in, so I'm going to enjoy the show.
Okay, cool. So I hope you will enjoy the show. Let's give it a try. So the show is actually inspired by this that we have now on the screen. Just a few days ago, we had the great Professor Reynolds on his channel. Is all of the details there. You can go and actually watch that. He started to talk about Hagarism, a book that has been very, very controversial, as he writes as well there in the thumbnail. And the title really got my eye. Was Umar the Messiah? Was like, okay, that's very exciting. I think that video is certainly worth watching, and I think he might actually turn it into a whole series where they go through the lots of the claims from the Patricia Cron's book. So it's really exciting. But why would Professor Reynolds approach it in that manner and say, well, was Umar the Messiah? There is a lot of information that would indicate that Umar was a very, very important person in the creation of Islam, as in he could have inspired lots of the stories. So this is what we're trying to do today, to just show how the stories, or many of the stories of Umar, they happen to have a parallel with the stories of Muhammad. So if J. Smith is right, and there was no Muhammad in the 7th century, and there was a later creation pretty much, then the stories still had to come from someplace. When they started writing the hadiths and the Sirah, they would borrow from stories of other people. I have actually found a few stories, for example, from even Abdul Malik, that makes it into the traditions as stories of Muhammad. The thing is that with Umar, we have a lot of parallels. So that's why I want to try and pin everything on Umar, even though I think that the stories of Muhammad is not one person. What they had in mind is we have to create one person, we have to pin everything to one guy. And in order to do that, we need to give him a backstory. And you cannot just invent every single story, many of them are, but otherwise you just have to try and work with what you've got, which is stories about other people. And Umar, I think, is perhaps the one with the most parallel stories, at least based on what I've seen. And we're going to show you quite a few of these ones during the show. So this video on screen from Professor Reynolds, one of the things that they focus on is from one of the early documents from outside the Standard Islamic Narrative, which is the Doctrina Jacobi, which is certainly worth a read. I've just selected this one section of it because they do talk about it during that video. In that source, it says, and they were saying that the prophet had appeared, coming with the Saracens, and that he was proclaiming the advent of the anointed one, the Christ who was to come. Now, that is already very, very packed. The Doctrina Jacobi was a Christian text, a Christian propaganda to convert Jews to Christianity and so on, or anti-Jewish propaganda, in whichever way you look at it. So when it says that this guy, who has at that point nothing to do with Judaism or with Christianity, they acknowledge him and they say that guy is saying that, well, he was proclaiming the advent of the anointed one. For a Christian, that would be okay. So that guy was saying that the Christ is coming back, that Jesus is coming back. So we are at the end of times. For a Jewish follower, they would think, okay, what that means is that they are conquering Jerusalem, they are building the temple, and then the Spirit of God will descend upon the temple, because the action of bringing forth the Spirit of God to the world is very action based. You need to conquer Jerusalem, you need to build the third temple. So, and that's actually where our story begins with Umar, because he's the one who actually conquered Jerusalem and did quite a few other things. So let's look a little bit about some of the parallels that we find about Umar and also on Muhammad. Now, bear in mind that the stories about Muhammad, they are made up. The stories of Umar may very well have been also made up. Everything comes from their sources for the most part. The difference is that we know that Umar existed because there are inscriptions, there are writings. We even know many of the names that he was known for, as Umar, Amir, which is the same, Ambrosius, also Khaled. So he had quite a few of these titles. He's the one that conquered Jerusalem, so you would certainly expect to have people writing about him. So with Muhammad, we don't have any writings outside of the narrative. With Umar, we do. So when we look at what the story of his life, according to the Standard Islamic Narrative, well, it is more likely to be real or real-ish. They could all be made up, and maybe some of the stories are saying that it was Umar, but it was in fact Abu Bakr or another guy called Bob. We cannot know. But for now, seeing as he was a real person in history, we're going to look at what the sources say about him, and then we're going to find the very same story applied to Muhammad, almost like a duplicated story.
Can I ask a question, JC, for clarification? I'm wondering, so what you're suggesting is essentially that we can't know for sure in terms of the stories, like the traditions that surround Umar or Muhammad or anyone for that matter, that we can't trust these stories necessarily. However, when it comes to Umar, as opposed to Muhammad, we know for sure that some person who was known by this name did in fact live at this time.
Yes, and actually quite a lot about him, because we know that he's the one who conquered Jerusalem. So when we know that, and then we go to the Standard Islamic Narrative, and they say we had a guy called Umar who conquered Jerusalem. So we start to see these parallels, well, not these parallels, this confirmation about his story from different sources. When it comes to Muhammad, that's not the case. There would only be stories from the Standard Islamic Narrative and much later. But with Umar, we do have a lot of confirmation about this guy being in the right places, doing the right things according to the Standard Islamic Narrative, and from outside sources. So it seems too much. It's like this argument that J. Smith often says when people say, well, there are inscriptions about a Muhammad up there in Syria. And they used to actually take the inscriptions and say, you see, this confirms that our prophet was real. And it's like, no, that's in Syria. You need to find the guy in the Hijaz doing the things that your Standard Islamic Narrative says. So that's the problem. With Umar, we know where he was from the Standard Islamic Narrative, and also, more importantly, from outside the Standard Islamic Narrative. So that's why.
And
And
also, there's a fault by saying, look at this inscription of MHMD. That means our guy was there. And the problem is, of course, then I can say, well, that means that Muhammad lived also in the 530s because I see his inscription in 523 or 525. So just because you see MHMD somewhere in an inscription, it says nothing about the historicity of Muhammad of the Hijaz.
yeah, and that's actually something that we see in history when historians find a record mentioning someone, they have to actually pin that to the region, to other sources to make sure that he's the right guy, because people have the same names or the same titles and things like that. In the case of Islam, because they had this void called Muhammad, every time that something similar to that name appeared anywhere, it would have to be their guy. It couldn't be someone else. And it's like, no, this is not how you do history. You would actually look at the region, about what this person is doing, who he has around, and all of those things. But Islam is always a little bit odd about all of this. So this screenshot in here shows part of that, because between the years 717 and 723, if I remember correctly, Leo III and Umar II, so that is Leo III, the Emperor of Byzantium, and Umar II, the Caliph of the Umayyad Caliphate at the time, they exchanged some correspondences. The one with from Umar was very brief. The one from Leo III is really detailed, is many, many, many pages long. And in one of the sections, he actually writes this: in brief, you admit that we say that it was written by God and brought down from the heavens, as you pretend for your Furqan, an argument that we have discussed before for different reasons, although we know that it was Umar, Abu Turab, and Salman the Persian, Salman al-Farisi, who composed that, even though the rumor has got around among you that God sent it down from the heavens. So he's talking about the Quran, but the name Quran doesn't seem to be established at that point. And he's saying clearly it was not just revealed to one guy. It's in fact these three guys who wrote it down. And we would have this from Leo III, who would have the best information available at the time. So if Muhammad didn't exist, but we know that a book happened to appear somehow, and it is full of different stories, as we have shown on the channel with Shai, for instance, that we spoke about. He showed us the Solomon and Sheba story, which comes from Talmudic legends, from Jewish legends. He's coming back next Monday to tell us about 3 other stories that are in the Jewish legends and so on. So there are stories from all over. It would have been not revealed to one guy, but rather composed by people who knew different stories. So maybe we look at this and we know now who was the first guy to start writing the Quran and giving it to his people. Whether that is correct or not, well, this is the earliest account of someone saying, your book comes from these people. So we have Umar in this mixture, and we will see more about that, something that confirms, at least in my opinion, that the account from Leo III was actually correct. But we will see that in a minute. So, an interesting account from Umar. So, Umar is the guy who conquers Jerusalem and actually starts to build the temple and so on. So, there is this account where Umar there are numerous accounts, in fact, of him being in Jerusalem and actually being very nice to the Jewish people. They even invite him to pray with him, pray with them at the top of the mount, and lots of other things. And he's absolutely fine. He's very, very chilled. So in this account, for example, Umar, after some consideration, permitted 70 Jewish households to return. They returned to live in the southern part of the city. So before he conquered Jerusalem, it was under the control of the Byzantines. And then he went in there, he kicked out the Byzantines, and he got the Jewish people to come back. Now, that's quite interesting because according to the Standard Islamic Narrative, the Jews were the enemy number one. Obviously, the Christians were the enemy number two, although they are very much underreported in their traditions. But you would think that they would have an incredible hatred for the Jews. In fact, we have a hadith, this one here, narrated by Umar, which is as well surprising, of Umar saying, if I live, inshallah, I shall certainly expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula. It's like, well, but there are other accounts saying that Umar was okay in Jerusalem, treating the Jewish people well. What is going on? This hadith, which is written, of course, much, much later, they make him into a guy who really wants to get rid of the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula. But you would assume that if that's the case, he's not going to have a lot of love for them up there in Jerusalem. But it's a little bit of a contradictory account. And that's Umar. Now, do we have any other parallels between Umar and Muhammad? Well, plenty of them. According to their traditions, Umar was born in Mecca, so just like Muhammad. He died in Medina, in Yathrib, just like Muhammad. So exactly the same part of the story with Umar and Muhammad, born same place, died in the same place. When we look at al-Tabari, there are a couple of interesting accounts in relation to Umar. This one is one of them. It says or the heading is his institution of the Islamic dating system. Now, that's interesting because you would have thought that Muhammad, seeing as he was the one who creates the whole movement and everybody needs to follow him, that he would be not just a military leader, but that he would introduce things and do things for, his followers to go and conquer the world. Yet it is Umar who actually says, hey, let's use this calendar. This is according to their own sources, by the way. So this is al-Tabari, nothing to do with anyone else. So according to the sources, Umar is the one who does that very important thing. Another thing he does, Umar was also the first to date documents and to stamp them with clay. All right, so he looks like an important guy. You would have thought that Muhammad, with his 70 scribes, I think he had 70 or 80 scribes, would actually be stamping documents with clay. I mean, would have been a reasonable thing to do, seeing as he was so important, right? But it is Umar, the first one. Also, Umar was the first to assemble the people to one imam, to lead them in the special Ramadan prayers. So that sounds like something that Muhammad should have done himself when he was preaching and preaching and preaching, not Umar. And then also, Umar, he also appointed two public Quran readers, one to lead the men in prayer, the other the women. Now, those are the sort of things that your spiritual leader, the one sent from the heavens with the knowledge of God, would implement. This is not something that Umar would implement. It would have to be the Muhammad. According to their traditions, it is Umar the one that seems to be creating something that hundreds of years later evolves into the Islam that we would now recognize. So
This is
he
JC.
institutes.
One second. This is JC. Isn't this the kind of bid'ah that we were not allowed to do, right? He's doing radical religious reforms. That's not the role for any ruler, like earthly ruler, to make religious decisions about, let's say, what the prayer is and this and that. No, we have traditions for that. But this is a very radical thing for him to do. It's something basically I would expect of a pope or a messiah.
It is what I would expect from the top guy, and particularly if there is one guy that is claiming to be a prophet and people believes him, he's going to tell people what they have to do. He's going to tell them how to do voodoo, how to do absolutely everything in their lives, which of course we know because it's in the Sunnah, but the Sunnah is written hundreds of years later. Yet when we go to Al-Tabari, we see that some of these things that certainly would have been done by the guy that starts the whole thing, it is in fact done not by that guy, not by Abu Bakr who comes after, but by Umar who comes third. It doesn't make sense. It looks like Umar was the one who started to create something. And remember, we've seen that Leo III had actually pinned the creation of the book on our friend Umar.
Yeah, and he mentioned Umar first, right?
Yep.
Okay, interesting.
Mhm. So, as a summary of this, so he institutes the calendar, something that you would possibly, this one you can argue, but possibly the top leader would do and would insist on. Also, he stamps documents. Well, looks like he was the first one of any importance. Then he assembled people to one imam, and really not Muhammad, that would actually segregate um, men and women and saying men will actually pray in this section and women there. This is something certainly that you would expect from Muhammad, not from the third guy, basically. And also, I find it interesting that it says that he appoints two public Quran readers. It's like, yeah, but Umar comes before Uthman. They didn't canonize the book yet. So at that point, even according to their traditions, people were reading things in different ways. The whole thing was a mess because they didn't canonize the book yet. I think it is more likely that they already had a book. He's already creating this thing. He's already starting to create something, and he's segregating men and women when they are going to pray, and they already have a book. The whole thing about the book being really compiled but kept under a mattress and then 20 years later it's rediscovered, or they get it back, and then they write it down for the first time, and for 20 years people just remembered. It's like, no, no, that doesn't make any sense. And the traditions indicate that they didn't remember. They just kept forgetting things. People died and verses were lost. So it looks like that's why what I'm trying to do is pin it on Umar based on what their sources are saying. And it looks like he's doing the sort of things that you would expect the Muhammad character to do.
Right. So
And
the
then there is
Muhammad
this,
character has had like this, all these stories are created. And you were talking about this in the beginning. We as humans don't just randomly create things out of nothing, ex nihilo. Ideas, not even, right? Our ideas usually are derivative of like 10 or 20 or 100 different other ideas that have already been thought, right? So it's the same thing with creating stories. You have historical memories and they get recalled. Also, one thing I wanted to point out about this source, I just think it funny, is that even here you see Islamic dating system. Islamic is in bracketology. So, you know, you have to put the word Islamic back into the history. How do we put it into the early sources? Well, we just put it in brackets.
yeah, all throughout the Quran is just like that. And even in hadiths, actually, because some of the hadiths, which probably they go back quite a bit, they had to fix it later. Because every time that you create a story, you're absolutely right about what you said. It's very difficult to create a whole story from scratch. For that, you need someone like Tolkien, and still, he will get parallels from lots of other stories, Norse mythology, First World War, or whatever it is, to actually create a story and so on. It's a very difficult thing, but it's even harder if it is not done by one guy and it is done by thousands of people over millennia of creating stories. Every time you create a story, you are creating plot holes and holes in the narrative. So uh, you would certainly try to copy from stories that were being told about other people. And we can see that this guy was very, very important. I would, I would guess if I actually had the power to go back in time, that we would see Umar doing a lot of the stuff that is now written in the Hadiths as Muhammad doing it, but the story then removed the name Umar and it was replaced with Muhammad. But there is no way of checking that. So very, very speculative. But we do have quite a few things that are parallel, which we're going to see. But for now, in here are things that are very important and the things you would expect from the spiritual leader to do and to establish pretty much from day one. And it looks like it is Umar doing those very important things. Then right there at the bottom, there is another account from Al-Tabari where Umar said to him, to Salman al-Farisi, this is, am I a king or a caliph? And Salman replied, if you collect from Muslims, from Muslim territory, 1 dirham or less or more, then you are a king and not a caliph. And Umar wept. It's like, this is a very unusual story to actually have there for so many reasons. First, who is Umar to go to Salman, to this guy, and say, I am a king or a caliph? Why? Salman has nothing to do with anything. If anything, uh, Umar would have been talking to Prophet Muhammad and saying, okay, so what is going to happen after you pass? You're now very ill. You've been ill for years. So what is going to happen? How am I to behave? Those things would have happened there. But Salman, it's almost like this story is telling Umar wanting to build something. And remember how we started the stream showing the Doctrina Jacobi, talking about the prophet that comes with the Saracens, and he was the one that was going to basically win the brownie points by conquering Jerusalem, and he did. When we read this passage from Tabari, it sounds like he's trying to be that he's trying to be like the chosen one who is going to do all of those things, and then the Spirit of God is going to descend upon the temple, and he's going to gain a lot of brownie points. It sounds like he's a man on a mission, as opposed to being merely the third caliph, or well, second caliph. Muhammad doesn't count as caliph. Um, Also, it's worth noting that, like with Al-Tabari, many of the words that he uses, they were not in existence during the time of the Rashidun period. That those actually come later. So the word caliph was used by Abdul Malik, but it meant something different. By the time that we get to the Abbasids, caliph means the current understanding that we now have, and Tabari writes 100 years later. So this story about Umar asking this question to Salman doesn't actually fit very well. So it's probably just a little bit of propaganda. But well, let's see. at other parallels, and now is when things get interesting. So these parallels are rather unique because they don't. Is the sort of things that you wouldn't expect many people um, to have gone through this arc or having done these things. So, oh, sorry, that is actually the next slide. On this one is just, according to Tabari, there are many pages like this where it says who is the first person who believed in the messenger. And there are other pages that will normally be Ali, Ali, Ali everywhere. Ali, Ali. In here, there is one that says Abu Bakr. So it will normally be Ali. It's like, okay, so if Umar happened to be the original guy, the praised one, the Muhammad, the first one to believe in him being Ali would actually still make perfect sense. Like these are two of the three people mentioned by Leo III. They would have been like pretty much first and second in command. Umar being the top dog and Ali being um, his trusted right hand, until then in the future, of course, he becomes his own caliph after he gets Umar assassinated. So that would still make sense. Do we have the parallels in here? Yes. So now, interesting parallels. John of Damascus writes a little section about the Quran, which is the story of Muhammad and Zayd and Zainab. Everybody knows the story, so I will just skip the full explanation. So, according to John of Damascus, what he was told is that Zayd, he was not the adopted son of Muhammad. He said it was a friend, and there is already an interesting word in there, friend. And then he says the whole thing about that he said, God has given me the command that you put away your wife. Then 5 minutes later, he says, oh, actually, he has asked me to marry her. And then, this is within the same account of John of Damascus, says, furthermore, if a brother puts away his wife, let his brother marry her, should he so wish. I mean, this whole passage is just wrong in so many ways. The interesting thing is that the Quran doesn't say that Zayd is a friend. It says that he is the adopted son. But when we look at Umar, um, we see that actually he had one of his wife was her name was Zainab. So he's like, okay, could that actually be the way that they created the story about Muhammad? Was it inspired by that? One of his wives was Zainab, but when you read these sources, it looks like there were like three names in antiquity. Everybody was called the same thing. Okay, but actually he also had one brother called Zaid, and they had a little bit of bad blood between them. So it does make me think whether the story of Muhammad and his friend Zaid and Zaid's wife Zainab, followed by, oh, by the way, so if a brother puts away his wife, let the brother marry her, whether that was inspired by Umar, his brother Zaid. Maybe brother Zaid was married to Zainab, and um, he divorced her and he takes her. So I wonder if that is how that story began. I think it's probably not, but I just found it interesting that he had a brother called like that. But now, the important one, and one parallel that I think is going to be very difficult to ignore, and is this. So Ali had a daughter. Her name was Zainab as well, because as I said, there were only three names in antiquity. Now, while she was still a child, Umar asked for her hand in marriage, right? Kash, does that ring any bells, any parallels with anything to do with Muhammad?
There was a story about Abu Bakr, Muhammad, and Aisha, right?
Hmm.
And
It seems to be,
that story is that, if I recall correctly, that Muhammad wanted to marry Abu Bakr's young daughter, and Abu Bakr didn't want it, but Muhammad got his way effectively.
yeah. And Abu Bakr was not very happy with that to begin with, but later he conceded. So we have a very similar story between Umar, a future caliph, Ali, and the daughter. And yeah, like I said, there the he asked for the hand in marriage, which was resisted by Ali. So he wasn't very happy. Just like with the stories of um, Abu Bakr just freaking out, like, what do you mean you want to marry my daughter? I thought we were pals, bro. So that sort of thing. Now, this is where it gets then more interesting. We have the dates of Umar as given by the Standard Islamic Narrative. So If this lady, Zainab bint Ali, married Umar, this is what would have happened. Her hand in marriage, he would have asked for her hand in marriage. Wait a second. During his reign. On one of these accounts, I think it may have been actually in Wikipedia, would have been something to happen early, possibly. Now, this is where it gets interesting. He reigned for 10 years. So, when he asked for her hand in marriage, she was still a child. What happened when Muhammad asked for the hand of Aisha? She was still a child. If he asked for the hand in marriage and then they get married a year into his reign of 10 years, so he reigns from 634 to 644, if that happens very quickly, as you would expect, and they married in 635, then they would have been married for 9 years exactly, the same amount of time that Aisha was married to Muhammad. And if we do a quick calculation with his dates, he would have been around 52-ish years old at the time. Just like Muhammad, I think according to the normal math, Muhammad was 53. So it's like pretty much there, almost a 1-for-1 parallel between the two. So both of them, the same story of marrying a child when they were that old age, who were married possibly for 9 years. As I said, we cannot know about Umar, but I think it's a reasonable guess. And they didn't marry this lady from the future caliph when they were in their 20s, not when they were in their 30s or their 40s, is when they are already in their 50s. And 9 years later, they're gone. So when I see this, is what makes me think that the story was copied from this guy and what happened between him and Ali, as those two people are attested in history, and the names just happened from something else, pretty much Abdul Malik. Do you have any thoughts so far, Kash?
It's definitely very, let's say, coincidental, I suppose, if you want to, you know,
Yeah.
right? So, okay, that's very interesting. So, I'm gonna have to, not now, but later, look into the name itself. I think it's very interesting, the two names you have there, right? So, Kulthum bint Ali, firstly, very interesting, daughter of Ali, obviously, where the tradition is Abu Bakr's daughter, but Abu Bakr itself is definitely a title. It means father, and then Bakr means firstborn. So the father of the firstborn, or like, Father Michael, maybe, like, that we say in, like, Protestants, they call him Father Michael. So maybe he's like, what exactly is there going on there? But it's definitely like very, very theological, because who's the firstborn of all creation from Hebrews? We know that's Christ, right? So I would suspect Abu Bakr, most certainly a title, probably a position, or like a sort of like a type of office, maybe. But regardless, so this Abu Bakr story seems to be very close to, let's say, quote unquote, real history regarding Umar and the wife which he married from Ali, right? Ali's daughter. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sorry, say again?
Is it bint Ali, as in, is this the Ali in question? Because the Zainab that Umar married, this Zainab is called Zainab bint Ali, or like something bint Ali. Is this
Yeah.
canonically the Ali in question? Yes, okay. So whether it was Abu Bakr's daughter as a real person, who we don't have attestations of him as a person in history the way we do for Umar, right? Or this story is about Umar, which we do have evidence for. So to me, my interpretation would be, okay, it seems like there's an informing. It's involved in the creation of the later traditions. They're drawing upon this memory, it seems to me.
Yes, and then they change the names basically because they have to create a whole different character from scratch. So they wouldn't be saying, okay, so let's create Muhammad, and then now he marries the daughter of Ali, and her name is Zainab. It's like, no, you need to change those things. You need to change the minimum amount of details to still make sense. So anyway, these are like some parallels, but we're going to see a little bit more about Umar, and I can't remember what comes next. Oh, this is just almost a quick fire round. There are some stories, these are kind of speculative, but as well a little bit of fun, of things that you would expect not to be a very common thing to happen in antiquity, not with a caliph or a ruler, but they happen to have been recorded for both Muhammad and also with Umar. One of them is this one. So we have the hadith on the left with Umar. The Prophet divorced Hafsa, but he took her back in marriage. Right, that's a he. And then we have that Umar is reported to have divorced a wife and then later remarried her. So if that's the case, we would have that parallel. Maybe it happened all the time and it's just pointless to bring it up. I just found it curious that caliphs would act in that manner. You would think that they would act a little bit like Henry VIII when they're done with one wife. Something happens to her. So other stuff in here. So we have actually narrated by Umar himself that the Prophet said, a man will not be asked as to why he beat his wife. So think about this. This is narrated by Umar saying that the Prophet said that a man will not be asked as to why he beats his wife. And the reason that Ali was not happy with Umar marrying Ali's daughter was because Umar's reputation for harsh treatment of women. Once again, this is 7th century Arabia. Maybe it was just absolutely common, but this happens to be attached to Umar, specifically Umar, and that's why we're making the case. If everybody else acted in the same way, well, but we don't really have it in the hadiths, and we have it recorded about Umar. And another interesting one, Umar said something, and then verses were revealed, basically about the hijab. Probably this is, I think, a well-known story that Umar said, "Oh, Allah's messenger, good and bad persons enter upon you." Sorry. So I suggest that you order the mothers of the believers to observe veils. Then Allah revealed the verses of al-hijab. So think about this. Umar opens his mouth, and as a result, women are still wearing hijabs to this day. Was he a real prophet? Maybe he was a real prophet because he knew what Allah was going to reveal before Allah revealed it. Maybe he knew what was written in the eternal tablets in heaven. You see the silliness. And this is a new command, women to wear veils, and then it appears in the Quran. So Umar wrote Quran. He's actually linked in this manner. We're going to see another couple of stories. And this one's another one, for example. So about, again, narrated by Umar. If you want to have some fun, you can go to sunnah.com, look at all of the hadiths narrated by Umar, and you're going to get a feeling after reading them that Muhammad was Umar, and that's it. Lots of them is actually him narrating things, saying things about himself, not to do with Muhammad giving instructions. It's very bizarre, and there aren't that many. So I would recommend anyone who wants to do this sort of research, have a look at sunnah.com and look at Umar. Just that, and you will see how few hadiths there are and how impactful they are. So this one in here, it says, it may be if he divorce you all, this is Umar talking to the wives of the Prophet, that Allah will give him, instead of you, wives better than you. And then a verse is revealed. So once again, Umar says something about the wives of the Prophet, yeah, maybe his wives, and something appears in the Quran saying exactly those things. So we see that there is a problem. Would that actually be in the eternal tablets? No, that would have been revealed before. It just doesn't make any sense. This is the guy saying things, and as if by magic, they appear in the Quran. But it's okay. It's not like we have the account of anyone saying that Umar wrote the book, like an emperor or someone. So, what else? So, these are the three areas that the hadiths say that he created the hadith because he says something and then they appear. If there was a Muhammad, you can say, well, he heard this Umar saying something and then he fabricated the revelation and went, oh, I'm getting a revelation. This is in the book. And he's like, dude, we heard Umar talking about this like 5 minutes ago. I think you are lying. I think it is more likely that it has nothing to do with a Muhammad being there in like piggy in the middle, and there is an Umar just creating his own things, just like Leo the Third said. And when it is recorded that he creates Quran, it's not that he says something and then Allah agrees with him. It's that he says something and it becomes basically divine. It gets written down. Now, these are the main things. The hadith mentioned that Allah agreed with Umar in 3 matters. In some places, it says more, and I can't remember now. I haven't seen the source for a while. I can't remember if it's in the Sirah. Can't remember. It appears in many collections, so these ones are very easy to see, and there are 2 that we've already shown on the screen. So one of them is about the hijab. Umar opened his mouth, and 1400 years later, women are still wearing hijabs. This has nothing to do with Allah. This has nothing to do with Muhammad. This has nothing to do with the flying spaghetti monster. Umar opened his mouth, and women are still wearing hijabs. Another one, there is the story about captives in Badr. You know, that battle that didn't happen. So during that battle, the Prophet wanted to show mercy, and Umar was like, "No, let's unalive them all." And then a surah, a revelation comes to Muhammad that Allah, of course, had agreed as well with Umar, and they don't show the leniency that they were going to. So another thing that he says, and then Allah agrees with him. And the third one, which look how impactful it is. The reason that Muslims are praying in a direction, now we call that Makkah, is because, again, Umar opened his mouth. This is according to their traditions. Umar said we should pray in the direction of the station of Abraham, and they are still praying in that direction. So when we take all of those things into account, we realize that if there was one blueprint for what then became the Muhammad of the Standard Islamic Narrative, Umar would score very high. Certainly, he wouldn't, all of the stories don't come from him, they come from other places. But this guy, it is reported to say things that end up in the Quran, important things such as praying in one direction or wearing veils. This verse, which appears in the Quran, has this ring of being his because it says about striking your wives, and we've seen that he had a bit of a reputation. And this other verse, which we have also shown the hadith for, about if he divorces you, maybe God will give him better wives. And it's like, I think he was speaking about himself and not about Muhammad. So I think when we take everything into account and we recognize that the stories of Muhammad would have come from many different sources, Umar would have been one of those guys that people told stories about because he conquered Jerusalem. He probably started to rebuild the third temple. He was the guy that accomplished the whole thing. In terms of imagine that there is a Muhammad guy, a guy that is walking around saying, I'm a prophet, and I'm going to bring forth the anointed one or the spirit of God. In order for that to happen, that person needs to conquer Jerusalem and build the temple. If that person doesn't do it, then he was not the chosen one to do it. He would just disappeared. So imagine that there was one guy before Umar who actually said those things. We are going to do this conquering, we are going to do these sort of things. The moment that person is killed without accomplishing the mission, which is Jerusalem, everything is for naught. He was not important in the slightest because it is a very action-based job to go and do those things. And the person who did it was Umar. He is recorded through Leo III as being one who wrote the Quran. We go to the hadiths and we see that a lot of the stuff that he said ended up in the Quran. If we ask the Shias, they will say that that the Sunnis worship Umar. I think they are right. And of course, the Sunnis say that the Shias worship Ali, which they are right as well. So there is just so many stories that I think they had to borrow from people in order to build the story of Muhammad. And Umar was probably one of the top guys because he was one of the most famous. He's the one that conquered Jerusalem and he introduced all of those things that we've seen in al-Tabari. So even though I think that there was not one guy called Muhammad, but rather they drew from the stories of many people, I think Umar was one of the most important ones in terms of providing plenty of his stories for the Ummah that appeared 200 years after his time.
And we have, so like you were saying, essentially, we have a source which attests that someone was preaching the coming of the anointed one, the coming of the Messiah. So putting aside whether it's the returning of the Messiah or the coming for the first time, uh, I'm on more on the side of coming for the first time because of what happens after that with Umar and the rebuilding of the temple and taking of Jerusalem and all that, right? That's very much in line with the expectations of someone who's awaiting the first coming of Messiah rather than the second. We Christians don't want to retake Jerusalem so that we force Judgment Day. It doesn't work like that, right? Unless you're an evangelical or whatever. I don't know what they believe, right? I'm just joking, guys. But anyway, so we have this coming of the Messiah claim, and then shortly after that source, we have the taking of Jerusalem by Umar. So we have someone making the claim that someone's going to come and do Messiah stuff, or to be Messiah. And how do you be Messiah? You do Messiah stuff. What is Messiah stuff? Retaking Jerusalem, building the third temple, and then the Spirit of God comes upon that temple. And dwells upon that forever and ever. That's the prophecy, right? So this would need to happen, as in two things. We have one, Messiah's coming, and then two, Messiah stuff gets done in history. It's reasonable, therefore, to assume that there's a connection between the two, which is what? That the prophet was preaching the coming of the Anointed One. The Anointed One has a job to do. He goes and he does the job. Presumably, he's successful at the job, and then he stands there in the middle of the built temple and everything. And everything is in place, everything's perfect, and you wait and you wait and you wait, and nothing happens. That's part of the situation that Umar was in, right? But anyway, we have, and then of course that realizes to him that there's a problem, and then we get these other traditions about his conversion to Christianity and all this interesting stuff. But that's for another stream. To me, in terms of these two data points, they're most certainly connected. So it seems to me, therefore, that Umar was a Messiah claimant who did Messiah stuff. So, like for example, the dating system to me is very interesting. Who has the authority to, like, in a religious, like not religious sense necessarily, but like, okay, our dating starts today. It's like saying, like with in the 20th century, 19th century, or 20th century more so. I mean, the 20th century and then 21st century, we have this idea of the end of history. It's like we still use the dating system. We still say 2025, but we start to say CE. Anyway, this sort of like we're starting new. There's a new paradigm. There's a new kingdom. There's a new world, right? So if I was Messiah, which I'm not, because there isn't, Christ is Messiah, but if I was Messiah, that's what I would do. I would start a new dating system. And then the later sources will write in brackets Islamic dating system when I never even use that word as Umar, right? So all these things, establishing a structured type of prayer, bringing all of the people into one faith, all of these things are like what you would expect Messiah to do. So it seems to me that Umar of the history was someone who believed himself to be Messiah. He fulfilled all that he believed he needed to fulfill to be Messiah. And yet. So yeah, that's what I would say about this.
So if there was, even if there was before him, say, we have in their history or the stories, they say Muhammad, Abu Bakr, and then Umar. So 2 guys before Umar. But even if they had been 100 guys and they form a coalition and they say, okay, fine, we have a mission. And the mission is we're going to Jerusalem, we're taking the city, we're building the temple. The guy in charge, he's going to try and do it. And if he accomplishes that, well, he goes down in history. He's like the Messiah, the one that brings forth the Spirit of God upon the temple and so on. But if that guy doesn't succeed, is the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. It has to be the one that actually gets the job done. It doesn't really matter, even if you have superpowers. You have to get that done. It is actually based on action. And the one that actually got there was Umar. And if it was only that, he was just, a normal warlord and he was around and conquers territory, would be fine. But then when we look at the accounts of how he was behaving according to outside sources and this Doctrina Jacobi, we say, okay, so when this is talking about a prophet going around, this is actually not talking about Muhammad. It is talking about someone who is just about to get into Jerusalem. They have a plan, they have a mission, and in order to do that, they have to rely on people who are from all sorts, by the way, because they would have been from the lands of Iraq, from the old Persian lands, and from Arabia. So their armies will be filled with Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, the whole thing. It would be a mess. So all of this animosity towards the Jews and Christians could not have happened on day one, because you wouldn't have been able to form an army that ends up going all the way to Jerusalem. What do you do? Only Arabs? Like, no, it wouldn't work. They needed that whole group. So it is only Islam that appears much later that says, now we hate the Jews and now we hate the Christians. But on day one, the mission is, well, we're going to actually get there and we're all best buddies. And when we look at the Quran, despite of being, like, say, very violent and all of these things, and certainly when we go to the Sunnah, but now we are unpacking the Quran, and we see that much of what it used to say when it was first written, it was actually very Christian, in fact, very Trinitarian, and of course, they borrowed from all other sources. But it was not this vision of Islam that we have now. That has been done by how, Cash, how is Professor Junis describing what they did with the text? Mafia, right?
Yeah, the wording he used was like, if I quote him best I can or paraphrase, he was saying, like he said, I sometimes use the term Islamic, or sorry, linguistic mafia. And then he recoils and says, "Oh, but you know, because of tradition and my respect for the sheikhs and all this, I don't usually say it." But yeah, that is what he would. He expresses his true opinion is that he observes the actions with these post, let's say, early 9th century additions to the textual material, diacritics, Hamzas especially, he highlights as being the acts, the works of a linguistic mafia.
Right. And what are we finding in the Quran? That he's 100% correct.
Yep, very much so.
So I think probably in terms of Umar, there are lots of other stories that they are actually in parallel. There are stories, for example, of the king of Egypt sending a concubine to Muhammad, and it's like, why? He didn't even get close to that land, and he's supposed to be basically a guy from the middle of the Hijaz. Nobody would care. But there is then the story of doing the king of Egypt doing the same thing to Umar. Again, maybe there was just common practice, and he sent concubines to, or wives, to anyone who was rising up, going up the ranks in any place. But there are these things that they seem to actually appear in both of them. And anyway, I still think that it's not like Umar is the guy that appears in the Sunnah and he was the original guy. I think it had, the first movement had nothing to do with the Islam that we now would recognize. The missions were very different, and they could be probably summarized as there were these people, particularly in Arab lands, and they took advantage of the Persian Empire being now weakened by war, which they actually knocked them out completely, and also the Byzantines, because they were exhausted by lots of things that had happened in their lands over the last 100 years, plus also exhausted by the war with the Persians. So they took advantage of that. They built an empire. It was more about warlords getting land and doing their own things, as opposed to, no, all of this happened because there is one guy that got the final revelation, and then he told the stuff to people. And then when they build the stories, they have to borrow. But I don't think that Umar was like, yeah, it was just him and he did the whole thing. I think he was very, very important in the creation, and we can see that shadow of what he did even in their own traditions and Al-Tabari and so on. So we wanted to actually bring this up because next week there will be this debate, which I suppose everybody's going to watch. We're really looking forward to it between the two giants, Jay Smith and Raymond Ibrahim, and they will probably be obviously wrestling over the historical angle of what happened, because things did happen, and it's pretty much one of the things that Raymond Ibrahim focuses on. Is things did happen. We have a book, and a religion came as a result of that, and they conquered all of these lands, and Arabic was kind of like the main thing in it. So where did it come from? We have a perfectly good explanation from the Standard Islamic Narrative. And J. Smith is on the other camp saying, yes, and all of that is a fabrication. So we just wanted to give a little bit more of background as to what is more likely to have happened on ground zero in with Jerusalem at the center, which then triggers a whole different movement that is very different to what the Quran says. The wordings say things very different, as we have shown countless times on the channel, and we will do again. We're actually working on some very important words that are mistranslated in the book. So what was happening in the 7th century had nothing to do with Islam, because Islam had not been invented at that point. So hopefully we can actually use some of this stuff when we are reviewing the debate from those two giants. Make sure that you like the stream, subscribe, click the notifications button, so that when we go live, which it will be almost immediately after they have had their debate, you can actually come and join us, ask us questions, and then we can stop the stream as well and unpick every single word they say. Are you looking forward to that one, Cash?
Yes, it's going to be very exciting. I look forward to seeing two giants, like you said, right? But we're not giants. But with what we know that they don't know it. So it's going to be fun to sort of see how the discussion goes, because this is going to be very representative of the what we expect of the average discussion on this topic, or not average, but like the top echelon of this kind of discussion happening in our current framework, our current paradigm of understanding, which is either, okay, we're like the heterodox, which is to be J. Smith, and we start to notice things about the history not lining up. We look at coins, this and this. There's some problem here. There's something wrong. I'm told in this tradition that X, Y, and Z. I look at history, unfortunately, not there, right? So history is lying. Trust the source. No. So we have this perspective, the heterodox perspective, and then we have the perspective of, okay, I don't like Muhammad, but affirming the sin, which has arguments such as, Jesus wasn't attested in sources until X years after his death, and Muhammad was attested in sources so closely to after it, or to the time of his death. It's like, yeah, maybe that's evidence that it's BS, right? So the argument about, oh, look how close to the tradition the source, the Quran comes about. It's so close and it tests him. There's MHMB in the text. Like, I wouldn't even know where to begin with the amount of anachronisms and errors that are in that statement, right? But these are gonna be the discussions that we're gonna have to have. We're gonna have to have these discussions of, okay, you are sticking with the sin. I get that. You have a lot of material. It's all internally coherent, but they're too late. I appreciate you're telling me about Harry Potter, but it's fiction. It's fiction. Why are we talking about fiction? Let's talk about real life, history, what actually happened. So anyway, it's gonna be super, super fun. I'm really, really excited.
Yeah, I think people can probably hear that you're as well very excited. And so that's coming next week. Next week, we have hopefully 3 shows. One on Monday, our friend Shai is coming back. He's going to talk to us about, I think, 3 stories. Also, a lot of fun. It's not going to be like before the Solomon and Sheba, which was a very, very long story. This time it's going to be 3 short stories. He's going to tell us and show us where those were borrowed from. So really, really cool. I've already seen the work, and it's really fascinating. We call the stream the pillars of Islam, and you will see why on Monday. Then we will be back as well on Thursday, Kash and I, to actually speak about some important word as well that should blow your mind. Is probably a very big find as well. And then we will do another one when Raymond Ibrahim and Jay Smith have had their debate. So hopefully a packed week next week. Hopefully we will see you all here, and let us know your thoughts as to your opinions on all of those different topics. Leave comments below. Any questions that you have, we will send them to the relevant people as well. And I think we are pretty much done for today. Akash, would you like to say any parting words?
I won't spoil the word that you were referring to, but I will say we will not, maybe next week, but the week after, we will have a investigation into the word shin. The shin, alhamdulillah, the shin of Allah, you see. So this is under the category of Allah's anatomy. So we'll have fun with that, maybe next week or the week after, and it should be exciting. You guys will enjoy that.
Great. Okay, well, guys, thank you very much for being here. God bless you all. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
There is only one Quran, right? Every Quran in the world is the same. That's what you've been told. You have been told a lie!
There are approximately 26 of the Quran.
26 different Quran!
There are 0 Dawa guys apparently left on the planet who are willing to defend Muhammad in a debate.
Everybody can go and read it. This is a book full of mistakes in Arabic, in the grammar, in the spelling, in the pronunciation.
Whoever wrote the Quran made an error because they didn't quite understand what was written in the 7th century in the Torah and the Injil.
As promised, I will give you more than 20 reasons why I left Islam in this video.
We know that stories about Muhammad were made up on an industrial scale.
What in the world is this Injil?